May I introduce myself? My name is Myra Heller, and instead of starting with my babyhood and bringing it up to the present, I decided I'm going to talk to you from today and go backwards. So today, I live with my husband, who is now 91. It's hard to believe. We have been living in Manhattan, New York, for the past 8 years, and we're having the time of our lives. Every day is a vacation day because we live in the heart of New York City. We live on 57th Street and 6th Avenue, and we turn the corner and we get to Carnegie Hall. We turn 2 other blocks and we get to Central Park. Turn in the other direction, walk a few blocks, and we're at the Museum of Modern Art. And for just everyday life, if we run out of milk, we go downstairs to Duane Reade, which is a big store that sells all kinds of groceries on one floor, and on the other floor, you can get anything that you want: a toothbrush, toothpaste, makeup, eyeliner, and so it's a very convenient area. We have a beautiful, sunny, bright apartment with 2 bedrooms. 1 bedroom we sleep in the bed that we had from when we were first married, and the other room we each have a desk, we each have a computer, we each have our books, we have a guest bed that opens so can sleep 2, and we have a very comfortable chair where every morning, with my cup of coffee, I read the New York Times. And everybody laughs at me because whenever we have a discussion, I quote something from the New York Times. So every day we decide what we're going to do for the day. Some days we go to a museum, some days we take a walk, some days we just stay in the apartment and do email. And usually we take an afternoon nap, and then in the evening we go to the theater. We're very, very big theater goers because, as you know, or maybe you don't know, we have 4 children. The oldest is Tuvia. He lives in Israel, and he has 5 daughters, 2 sons-in-law, and the 2 married girls, Shira and Devori. One has 3 children, 3 little girls, and one has 2 boys and is pregnant, and this month is going to have another baby. Then we have Kathy, who lives in Boston with her husband Danny. And to go back to Tuvia, I had the best daughter-in-law in the whole world, Chaya, and very, very sadly, we lost her last year. And she was a very special, wonderful person. So now we're with Kathy, and her husband is Danny, and she met him when she was in college. And they have 2 children. Nicholas is married to Claudia, and Megan is engaged to Jordan. And they live in St. Louis. Then we just lost last year also. It was a very sad year for us. We lost Douglas, who was married to Nancy, and Douglas had 2 sons, Gregory and Robert. Gregory is now in his own business where he does he does projects in housing, and Robert wants to be a director. He's getting his master's degree in directing and theater. Then we have, after Kathy, it was Douglas, and then the youngest is Adam, who is an actor and is now in a play in Raleigh, North Carolina, called The Drowsy Chaperone, and he's been in many plays in New York and around around the United States. And some of his outstanding plays were Titanic, and he was in a play with a famous star, and he's had a very nice career. And as you know, so we have or had 5 children and 9 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. So we're very, very lucky people to have so many wonderful people in our family. Jack and I got married in 1946. And do you want to know how I met him? I will tell you. But before we go on to that period, I'm going to show you some pictures of the family. And where shall I start? Well, I'll just pick them up randomly. These are some of our grandchildren. And nieces and nephews. We have a wonderful family. They're all nice, well brought up, lovely children, all have interesting work that they like to do. They're all college graduates, and we're very proud of all of our grandchildren. Then we have, this was also with my sister-in-law, Helene. We lost my brother, Herb, a few years ago, and here we are with her family and my family. But I'll let you do their own videos. There are so many of them to talk about. And here we were this year when Tuvia, our oldest, visited us from Israel. So we were all together. Douglas was still with us. And so we're together as a family for the last time before we lost Douglas. And Chaya was not with us at that time either. And now this picture is Tuvia. This is Tuvia and his daughters and his grandchildren, and they are one wonderful family. We love all our family. They're all doing well, and we are all very happy together. So to go back to the beginning of how all these people came into the world, it had to be after I was married to Jack.
How did you come into the world?
I'm going backwards, Tuvia. So we have to do my meeting Jack first before my babyhood, if that's all right with you. So when but I have to go back a little bit, Tuvia, you're right. When I was a school child, I was very, very shy and very quiet. And my mother was always saying, when I was in kindergarten, when I was in first grade, when I was in second grade, Myra, you're always reading. I had a comfortable chair in my bedroom, and I loved reading books. And she said, Myra, you have to have friends in this world. I want you to go out and find some friends. Mom, I would say, I love to read. She said, you can read in your spare time, but you have to find friends. So I got so tired of hearing her telling me this, I decided, well, I will make a friend. So I was in third grade, and I looked around my classroom, decided to make a friend of a girl named Lainey, who was an artist, and we both liked to draw, so we became friends. Well, I'm going to tell you what happened with Lainey after we went to high school together, and then she went to one art college, I went to another art college, and she had a sister named Phyllis. Phyllis met a young man because her grandmother, who lived with them, was walking on the street in Brooklyn. That's where we all lived, in Brooklyn. And she met an old friend that she hadn't seen in a long time. And the two women were talking, and one friend, the friend, Minnie, said, "My son is in the army in Africa. You have two granddaughters. Why don't you have one of your granddaughters write to him? He's very lonesome." So when Grandma Weiss came back to their house, Lainey and Phyllis's house, she told them this story, and Phyllis started to write to him. They became very friendly through the mail, and when he came home, he said, on furlough, he has two friends. How about going out with my two friends? And if you have two friends, we'll all go out together. So Phyllis thought that it would be nice to introduce Lainey to his friend Donald, and introduce their friend Myra, who was at Syracuse University, with Jack, who was his other friend. So the three of us went on dates when we were in college, and the three of us married these three men. So that's how I met Jack, through Phyllis, through Richard, and we have stayed friends all these years. Now I am married to Jack, 66 years, and Phyllis and Dick are still married 65 years, and sadly, we lost Lainey, and look who's continued. Sadly, what was I up to? We lost Lainey and Donald two years ago. So, to work backwards, when Jack and I met and decided to get married, we had to find an apartment. And to find an apartment in New York at that time was very, very hard. So luckily, my father, who was an accountant, and he had a client who built an apartment house on 90th Street between York and East End. And I'm just going to interrupt this talk for a little bit and say hello to
He's
Robert.
going to work.
Hello, Robert. See you later. So he found us this beautiful apartment. So instead of having a big wedding that we had originally planned, we decided to just get married with close family and friends and move into this lovely apartment, which we did. And when Jack gets on, he'll tell you his story when he had one of his first jobs.
You
when we
didn't have
lived.
a big wedding?
We did not have a big wedding.
Where was your wedding?
Because at the Hotel Pennsylvania,
Where was that?
on 34th Street, across the street from Penn Station.
And that wasn't a big fancy hotel?
It was a big fancy hotel, but we did not have a big fancy wedding. I didn't even have time to buy a wedding dress and a veil. I wore a very pretty dress that I had worn to my cousin Joan's wedding because we didn't want to not use the apartment. So we had a small, intimate, but very happy event, a very nice wedding. And when we go to the Hotel Pennsylvania, we have very happy memories. So when we were first married, I was working, I had majored in art at Syracuse, and I decided I wanted to paint murals in people's houses. So I was working on my portfolio, and Jack had a job teaching, but he'll tell you his story. And then when we lived in the apartment, Tuvia was born, whose name was Glenn at that time. And then Kathy was born.
In the apartment, you had home births?
No, I became pregnant when we lived in that first apartment, and Glenn was born in the hospital in New York, in a hospital, and he was an adorable red-headed child, to our amazement. And the doctor said it was 1 in 1,000 chance that we would have a red-headed child, because the two of us had brown hair. But he was a very cute, very lively child, very, very active. And then we had Kathy, who also was a redhead, to our amazement. And she was very docile and very sweet. I could put her in the high chair with a piece of string, and she would be busy for hours playing with the string. Then I became pregnant, and we decided all our friends were moving to the suburbs, moving out of New York, and so that the children would have gardens to play in and neighbors to play with. So we started looking for houses, and we found a lovely house in Englewood, New Jersey, and across town who lived but Laney and Donald. So our kids grew up with the Powell kids, and we had a lovely time in Englewood, and we lived there for 17 years. And after that, Jack got a job at Stony Brook University, way out on the island, and I was not very happy to move away from my friends and my family, but a job is a job, and we did move out there, and we lived there for 30 years. And then when we were in Englewood, to go back to our first move to Englewood, Douglas was born, and he was our first baby that we could put out in the carriage in the backyard and just have him get the sunshine and all. And then a few years after that, 6 years to be exact, Adam was born, and he was also born in Englewood, New Jersey, and he was in all the school plays when he was young. And he decided that he wanted to be an actor. So all through those years, they were spent raising the children. Laney and I went into a business of interior decorating. I got my master's degree in art education, and they were wonderful years. It was wonderful seeing Tuvia, whose name was Glenn at the time, grow up. He was a very excellent sports person. He was a whiz at baseball, and it was always fun having him in the house and telling us stories of school. And he went to Temple Sinai and had a very nice bar mitzvah. He did very well in his Jewish studies, and he had nice friends that he would bring to the house. And Kathy.
Did Glenn ever have a dog?
The dog stories, we had several dogs, and none of them really worked out because none of us really liked walking the dog morning, noon, and night. Can I invite you, Tuvia, to tell the dog story?
Your uncle, Al, was a taxi driver,
Right,
and he had a customer who wanted to sell his German Shepherd.
right,
And Glenn wanted a dog. So your Aunt Rose said, Myra, I have a dog for Glenn. So Al brought the dog in the taxi, and you put me and the dog in the basement. And then the dog had to go for a walk. So the dog walked little Glenn around the block, and Glenn hid in the bathroom in the basement until he begged his parents to get rid of the dog. You remember that?
I remember that.
Okay.
And none of us really loved the dog because none of us wanted to walk the dog. So when Jack went to work that morning, maybe 2 days after we had the dog and it really wasn't working out, he said, when I come home, it's either the dog or me. And we did choose to keep Jack. So we drove the dog to a place where they said they would place him with a family who would take care of the dog and loved the dog and knew about dogs and could walk the dog. So that was our dog story. And so the children grew up. Glenn grew up and Kathy grew up and Douglas. Glenn went to NYU and had very original ways of answering tests. I remember he had a sociology test, and instead of writing a paper, he drew a picture that described what the problem was that the teacher had given them. So he always was very inventive, and he was a very good artist, and he became an artist and did beautiful, beautiful, intricate paintings of mandalas that were colorful, that were interesting. And I think if he had kept on, he would have been hanging at the Museum of Modern Art now. But he made friends and became very interested in Judaism and decided that this was his role in life. And he became Orthodox through the influence of Shlomo Carlebach. And he made good friends. And his story is he went to Israel to visit a friend. They introduced him to Chaya. And when he came home after 1 week in Israel, he told us he met the woman he's going to marry. I said, in 1 week, Tuvia? Is that possible? Because by then he had changed his name from Glenn to Tuvia. So he said, I want to call her parents and introduce myself. So he calls Toronto, where Chaya's parents lived, and said, hello, is this Mr. Schreiber? I am going to be your son-in-law. My name is Tuvia Heller. Well, the way we heard the story from Louis, he nearly fainted because he had never heard that Chaya was going with anybody. So he said, I will have my wife call you when she comes back. So she came back a half hour later and called, and also was amazed to hear this story, and said, I want to meet your mother, Tuvia. Let's make an arrangement. So she came down the following week, and we met in a kosher Chinese restaurant, and we fell in love with one another. Joy and I became best friends at that dinner, so we are very grateful to Tuvia and Chaya for introducing us to Joy. So Joy and I had a lovely meal together, and she liked Tuvia very much, and it was a great success. And so Tuvia and Chaya got married, and as I told you before, they had 5 wonderful children, and now have grandchildren, and we have great-grandchildren. So that was Tuvia's story, and he became very adept at websites and working on the computer. then Kathy in college met Danny, and they got married. And as I told you, they had 2 children who now, one is married and one is engaged. And Kathy became a teacher of special education and became head of her department at the high school, a very important job. And Danny, who graduated as an English major, didn't quite know what he wanted to do for a career, but he decided he really was interested in architecture and buildings. So he went to an architecture school and got a job with doing renovations for low-cost housing, and now he is in his own business doing that work. Then Douglas, when he went to college, he went to University of Rochester. He was very interested in history and words, and he wrote the daily crossword puzzle for the school newspaper, and he became well known at his university for the crossword puzzles he created. And all his life he did crossword puzzles, and he was in very many computer jobs. He wanted to introduce computers into every classroom. He was ahead of his time because now every school has computers, but at that time it was considered revolutionary. Then he married Janice, who was a school friend, and they had 2 children, Gregory and Robert, that I told you about before. And then, sadly, Douglas got pancreatic cancer and did die from that. And to go back to Tuvia, I left out that sad part. I guess it's just too sad to talk about when Haya got ill with many illnesses, and she died too young. And she was such a wonderful daughter-in-law. We loved one another like we were mother and daughter. And it's a big loss in our lives not to have Haya, and a loss in our lives not to have Douglas. But life goes on, and as they say, life is for the living. That sentence I got from Helene's mother, who said that. So back to Kathy and her family, and Douglas and his family, and then Adam married 2 beautiful actresses. Neither marriage worked out, and now he has somebody that he's very fond of, and she of him, and let's hope that that works out for them. So that's the children. And now, do you want to hear about me when I was a child? Well, you really don't have any choice. So I will tell you about me and my early life. So my mother, whose name was Bertha, met my father, whose name was Hyman, through her uncle's business. My father was an accountant, and he was introduced to my mother, and they fell in love and got married.
Who introduced them?
And she had 2 nieces, twins, who said, Aunt Bertha, we want you to meet our accountant. And they are gone now, as is my mother and my father. So they introduced my mother, their aunt, to their father's accountant. And they got married, and 3 years, I think, after they were married, I was born. And then 3 years after that, as they tell me, I don't remember the story, that my mother is fat, and then the day she gave birth, my mother isn't fat anymore. So that was a silly thing to say, but anyway, my brother was born in the house, and I opened their bedroom door and watched him come into the world, so that was very interesting. And they named him Herb, and he was interested in sports and politics, and I was interested in art and dance. And so we were raised in two different ways, which was interesting, because when Herb grew up, it was his wife that had to introduce him to museums. And we had a very happy childhood in Brooklyn with a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins, because my father was one of 11 children, and most of them lived in Brooklyn. My mother was one of 6 children, and some of them lived in Brooklyn. One of our favorites was Uncle Sam, who was a candy salesman, and he sold candies that are still popular today. They're chocolate-covered jellies and chocolate-covered marshmallow twists. So people still eat that at Pesach time. So my childhood was...
Where did you go to school? Which schools did you and your brother go to?
We went to local schools I went to a local school in Brooklyn, a PS 199, and then I went to PS 238, and then I went to Lincoln High School, graduated from that high school, and then I went to Syracuse University and majored in art. Herbie went to the Yeshiva of Flatbush in Brooklyn, and then he went to public high school, and he was the smartest person in the whole high school, so he was the valedictorian at graduation. And then he got a scholarship to Harvard, which is a very prestigious college in America, and he majored in economics and in Russian economics. My father thought that would be a very good field, and it turned out to be so, because after he got his PhD, after 10 years, he got a job teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, where he stayed all his teaching life until recently, when about 5 years ago he contracted cancer and sadly died, leaving 2 children, 2 daughters named Jan and Judy, and they had a brother who died too young, in his early 30s. And so to get back to our childhood, we had a very happy childhood in Brooklyn.
You remember your grandparents?
And my grandparents lived 3 blocks away from us. They spoke Yiddish, and my only Yiddish was, "Was machst du?" And you can have just so much of a conversation when I just knew that one sentence. But they were very loving and very caring and very nice.
Why did they only know Yiddish?
They never could learn English. It was too hard for them, I guess. And my mother, who knew Yiddish, could have conversations with them. So 2 things I learned from my grandfather. He always put rubber bands on the doorknobs, and that's something we still do. And he taught me Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled, Zayin, Ches, Tes, Yud, and that was as far as I got with Yiddish. And but he was a very fun grandfather, and we were very attached. I heard the story, I don't remember it, that once we were crossing the street and he met a neighbor of his and started to talk, and I pulled him because I was getting bored listening to their conversation, and I pulled so hard he fell down and broke his leg. So I was a wild one, they told me, until I was 6, and then when I went to school, I calmed down. And Tuvia, who was also a wild child, they said he took after me, but he grew up to be a quiet person, and I also grew up to be a quiet person. And so that was my childhood.
What did your
And
grandparents do?
My grandfather was a cabinet maker, but by the time they came to America, which was a sad story, they left Russia because they didn't want to go into the army of the Tsar, and they came across on a boat, and my grandmother died on the boat of tuberculosis. So my mother came to America without a mother. So that must have been very, very sad for her. But she did have siblings, and they were a very close family. My father was born in America, so he doesn't have many stories, except that the 11 children around the table would all grab for the rolls to see who could get the most rolls to eat for breakfast. So he had nice memories of his childhood.
Why did they have 11 children?
I would assume because they were Orthodox, but my father did not. My father continued being Orthodox, but not in a big-time way. But when the holidays came, he gathered all his brothers, and they all went to the same Orthodox shul on Avenue N and East 5th Street. And that's where Tuvia would go to shul with him and liked it very much. And the family got together. The women would cook together and then have gather the whole family after services. So I have happy memories of the Jewish holidays in my childhood. And then let's go back to my mother and father and their youth. And before that, I don't know very much. So it's been very, very nice talking to you. If you have any questions, ask me. I'm sure I left out a lot, but I hope I gave you a nice picture of my family, both then and now. And I hope you all have a good life and enjoy one another and stick closely to the family. And love to you all. Love each and every one of you who is watching this video. It was very nice being with you, and I look forward to hearing all your stories. Bye now.